I handed my brother $63,000 and watched him take it with both hands and a smile that I thought was gratitude. It wasn't gratitude. It was the smile of someone who had already decided what he was going to do with the money, and none of it was what he told me. That was 3 years before the moment I'm going to tell you about. 3 years before I sat across from him at our parents' dining room table and watched his face go through every stage of realization, confusion, then understanding, then something that looked very much like fear, as he finally grasped the full weight of what he had done. And what I had become while he wasn't paying attention. My name is Jordan. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how my brother Marcus spent 3 years treating me like a footnote in his own story, and how I spent those same 3 years writing an entirely different ending. You need to understand who Marcus was before I can explain what he did. Because Marcus wasn't a stranger who deceived me. He was my big brother. 5 years older, the firstborn, the one my parents talked about at every family dinner like he was a feature film and the rest of us were the credits that rolled afterward. Growing up in our house, Marcus occupied a specific kind of space. He was the one who got the car for his 16th birthday while I got a card with $20 in it and a speech about building character. He was the one whose college applications my mother proofread 4 times while mine got a single glance and the comment that I should probably lower my expectations a little. He was the one who came home from his first job and was celebrated like a returning hero while I graduated with honors from a program I had funded entirely myself through scholarships and weekend work and was met with, essentially, mild acknowledgement. I am not telling you this to make you hate my parents. They weren't monsters. They were people with a blind spot the size of a firstborn son, and that is a common and human failing. What I am telling you is that I grew up understanding, in the way that second children in families like mine always understand, that I was operating on a different set of rules. That I would not be caught the way Marcus was caught. That what I built, I would build on ground I had prepared myself. That understanding served me very well. Eventually. But first, it led me to make a very significant mistake. When Marcus called me 7 years ago and told me about the business opportunity, I was 26 and had been working in project management for 3 years. I had saved carefully, the way I did everything, methodically, without fanfare, without telling anyone what I was building. $63,000 in a savings account that represented 4 years of deliberate, disciplined accumulation. Marcus's pitch was detailed and confident, which should have been the first warning. Vague people give vague pitches. Confident people with specific numbers and timelines and projected returns are often people who have practiced the pitch rather than done the math. He was launching a logistics company. He had a partner, a man named Troy who Marcus described as having serious industry connections. He had a business plan. He had projections. He had a gap in his startup capital that was exactly, almost uncannily, the size of my savings account. I'm not asking for a gift, he said. This is an investment. You'll be a silent partner. When we turn profitable, and we will, Jordan, I've run these numbers, you'll get 20% of returns. This could be life-changing for both of us. I asked questions. He answered them. Some of the answers I should have pushed harder on, the timeline for profitability, the specific nature of Troy's connections, the contingency plan if initial projections weren't met. But Marcus was my brother, and there is a particular vulnerability in lending money to family that has nothing to do with the investment itself. It has to do with the story you tell yourself about the relationship. I believed in Marcus not because the numbers were airtight but because I wanted to believe my big brother was someone worth believing in. I transferred $63,000 to his business account on a Thursday afternoon in September. I wish I could say that was the end of the normal part of this story. It was the beginning of a very long lesson. The first year, Marcus gave me quarterly updates. Enthusiastic ones, full of language about gaining traction and building the client pipeline, and these things take time, Jordan, anyone in business knows that. I received these updates and filed them away and continued working and continued to not ask too many questions, because asking too many questions felt like a lack of faith, and I was still in the chapter of this story where faith in my brother felt like the right choice. The second year, the quarterly updates became sporadic. I would reach out and Marcus would respond with shorter messages, still optimistic, but the specificity had thinned out. The numbers he cited were vaguer. The timelines kept shifting. When I asked directly about the status of the partnership with Troy, Marcus said Troy had stepped back from operations, but that this was actually a good thing because it gave Marcus full control. I sat with that answer for a while. And then I started doing something I should have done from the beginning. I started looking. Not aggressively. Not accusatorially. I started quietly checking. I looked up the business registration. It existed, but showed no active filings for the second year. I searched for the company online and found a website that hadn't been updated in 14 months. I looked for Troy, the partner with the serious industry connections, and found a LinkedIn profile that showed him currently employed at an unrelated company in Dallas with no mention of a logistics venture. I looked at these things and I sat with what they meant. And I did not call Marcus and confront him. I want you to understand that choice, because it matters. I didn't call him because I wasn't ready. Because I didn't have the full picture yet. Because if I confronted Marcus with incomplete information, he would find the gaps and fill them with explanations, and I would end up in the same place I had been for 2 years, believing a story because I wanted to believe it. I needed to know everything before I said anything. I kept waiting. I kept watching. And then came the dinner. It was my mother's birthday. A family dinner, the kind where everyone performs their assigned roles and the evening moves through familiar choreography. Marcus arrived late and loud and immediately occupied the room, the way he always occupied rooms. He had a new watch. He was tan in the way people get tan when they spend time somewhere warm voluntarily rather than accidentally. He was telling a story about a weekend trip he'd taken, somewhere nice, somewhere that required flights and hotel reservations and the easy spending of money. I sat across from him and I watched and I calculated. After dinner, when my father had gone to his chair and my mother was in the kitchen, Marcus and I were alone at the table for a few minutes. And I said, carefully, conversationally, the business sounds like it's going well. You seem relaxed. Marcus leaned back in his chair with the particular ease of a man who has never been caught. Things are moving, he said. Slowly, but they're moving. What did you do for New Year's? I asked. You mentioned a trip. Cancun, he said. Just like that. No hesitation. Needed a reset. I looked at him across the table and I did the math that I had been doing quietly for months, and the math was very clear. The logistics company had never been operational. Troy had left before it launched. The $63,000 I had given my brother had not gone into a business. It had gone into Marcus's life, his rent, his lifestyle, his tan, his watch, his Cancun reset. All of it. All of my savings. Gone. And he was sitting across from me at our mother's birthday dinner talking about it with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had managed the situation successfully. I didn't say anything that night. I smiled when my mother came back to the table. I helped clear the dishes. I hugged everyone goodbye. I drove home and I sat in my apartment and I let myself feel, alone and in private, everything I hadn't let myself feel at the table. And then I stopped feeling it. And I started planning. But that wasn't the worst part. About 3 weeks after my mother's birthday, Marcus called me. Not to come clean. not to apologize or explain or offer any kind of accounting for the money. He called because he had heard through my mother that I had been promoted at work, a significant promotion, project director, with a salary that represented a meaningful step up from where I had been. And Marcus called to congratulate me. Except the congratulations only lasted about 90 seconds before the conversation shifted to a story about a new opportunity he was exploring, something in real estate this time, and how the timing was interesting given that I was doing so well, and how family should support each other, and how he had always believed in me even when things were hard. I stopped him. Not dramatically. Very quietly. "Marcus," I said. "How's the logistics company?" A pause. "It's been restructured," he said. "Honestly, Jordan, it didn't pan out the way I hoped. These things happen in business. I was going to talk to you about it." "When?" I said. Another pause. "Soon. I wanted to wait until I had something positive to tell you." "So the $63,000, I said. Silence. "I'm going to make it right," he said. "I want you to know that. I fully intend." "I have to go," I said. "I'll talk to you soon." I hung up. Sat very still for about 30 seconds. And then I opened my laptop and I started building a document. Let me tell you about the document. Because the document is important. I called it, in my own head, the full picture. It was a comprehensive, meticulously organized record of everything, every conversation with Marcus about the business, time-stamped where possible. Every transfer I had made to his account, with bank records attached. Every piece of due diligence I had done after the fact, the business registration records, the inactive filings, Troy's LinkedIn, the company website with the 14-month-old updates. Every incongruity between what Marcus had told me and what the paper trail actually showed. I am not, by training, a lawyer. But I am, by nature and by career, someone who understands documentation. Project management is fundamentally about creating clear records of decisions, timelines, and outcomes. I applied those skills to what Marcus had done with the precision of someone who has decided that the truth deserves to be fully assembled before it is used. It took me 6 weeks to complete the document. 6 weeks of evenings and weekends, pulling records, organizing timelines, verifying details. At the end of it I had something that was, in essence, a complete case file for what Marcus had done. And then I did something with it that no one expected. I put it away. Not because I wasn't going to use it. Because I wasn't ready yet. Because the document was a weapon that would be most effective at the right moment, and the right moment was not yet. I had other things to build first. I want to tell you about what I did in the 2 years that followed the phone call where Marcus told me the business hadn't panned out. I did not confront him publicly. I did not tell my parents. I did not reach out to mutual friends or post anything or take any action that would signal to Marcus that the situation was anything other than an uncomfortable subject we had agreed to set aside. I let Marcus believe he had managed me. And in the space that created, in the room that his complacency opened up, I built. The promotion at work was real and it was significant. I threw myself into it with an intensity that surprised even me. Within 8 months I had exceeded every performance benchmark my director had set. Within 14 months I was being discussed for a role that I hadn't expected to be eligible for another 3 years. I said yes to every project that stretched me. I stayed late not because I was asked but because I was building something, a reputation, a track record, a set of capabilities that would matter enormously in ways I was beginning to understand. I also did something else. With careful, deliberate discipline, I rebuilt my savings. Not to the level of what Marcus had taken, beyond it. I restructured my budget completely. I took on a freelance consulting project on weekends, applying my project management skills to a startup that needed operational support. That project turned into a referral, which turned into another project, which turned into a small but real secondary income that I funneled entirely into savings. In 22 months, I had saved $40,000. In 30 months, I had saved $68,000. $5,000 more than what Marcus had taken. I remember the day I looked at my account balance and saw that number. I remember sitting with my laptop open and feeling something I hadn't felt since before I transferred that money to my brother's account, a sense of standing on solid ground. The ground I had made myself. But I wasn't finished yet. Because rebuilding the money was only one part of what I was building. I had stayed connected to Marcus during this period. Polite, surface-level connection, birthday texts, family dinner attendance, the maintenance of a relationship that looked, from the outside, like siblings who were close enough. My parents believed nothing had fundamentally changed between us. Marcus, I am fairly certain, believed he had navigated a difficult situation with minimal fallout. He had lost a business venture. He had borrowed money from his sister that he couldn't repay. These things happen. People move on. He moved on. He started the real estate thing he had mentioned, which was less a business than a sideline, helping a friend flip properties, doing some minor consulting work, making connections. He was good at the social side of that world, always had been. He made some money. Not transformative money, but enough to maintain his lifestyle and his confidence and his particular conviction that things generally worked out for Marcus. I watched all of this from a careful distance and I learned everything I could. And then I got a call from my father. My father was not a man who called me often. He loved me in the way fathers like him love their quieter children, a distant, genuine affection that doesn't always know how to express itself. So when he called on a Tuesday afternoon, I felt something shift slightly before I even answered. He said Marcus had gotten into some trouble. The real estate sideline had gone sideways. Details emerged gradually over the course of a 15-minute phone call. A deal that Marcus had represented to an investor as lower risk than it was, an investor who was now threatening legal action, a situation that had become complicated enough that Marcus had consulted a lawyer and been told the exposure was real. He's in a difficult position, my father said. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. A pause. My father is not a man who pauses naturally. He pauses when he's trying to find words for something he doesn't quite know how to say. He's going to need some help, my father said. Financial help. To manage the legal costs and stabilize things. I said nothing. I know you've done well recently, my father said. Your mother and I are very proud of how you've built yourself up. And I know Marcus and you have had some tension around that investment he made. I almost said something then. About the word investment. About the gap between what that word implies and what actually happened. But I let it pass. How much does he need? I said. My father named a number. It was substantial. Not as large as what Marcus had taken from me, but in the same register, the kind of money that represents years of careful accumulation for most people. I'll think about it, I said. Jordan. I'll think about it, Dad. I promise I'll give it serious thought. After I hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand for a while. And then I called my mother. Not to discuss Marcus. To make a plan. I told my mother I wanted to arrange a family dinner. Just the four of us. I told her I had been thinking a lot about the family lately and I wanted time together before the year got busy. She was pleased. She always responded well to me initiating family connection, because I didn't do it often enough to make it routine, so when I did, it felt meaningful. She suggested Saturday. I said Saturday was perfect. I spent the rest of that week making preparations that had nothing to do with food. I called my attorney, a woman I had worked with on some contract review for my freelance consulting work, someone sharp and practical. I laid out the full situation regarding Marcus and the $63,000. I showed her the document I had built 2 years earlier, the full picture, all of it. She reviewed it carefully and told me what I had suspected: the documentation was solid. The transfers were traceable. The timeline clearly established that Marcus had represented the money as a business investment and had not used it for that purpose. The legal options were real. Then I made 2 other calls. The first was to a man named Gerald Park, who was a property developer I had worked with through my consulting practice. I had helped Gerald's company with an operational restructuring project 8 months earlier, and we had developed a professional relationship that I valued. Gerald was connected, respected, and, importantly, he operated in the same real estate world that Marcus had been moving through. I asked Gerald if he knew of a Marcus Ellis from the local real estate community. Gerald went quiet for a moment and then said, "I know the name. He was involved in a deal recently that raised some flags." "Why do you ask?" I told him Marcus was my brother. Gerald went quiet again in a different way. "That's a complicated situation," Gerald said carefully. "Yes," I said. "It is." The second call was to my oldest friend, a woman named Priya, who had known my family for 15 years and who was one of the very few people outside my professional life who knew what Marcus had done with my savings. Priya was a journalist by training, currently working in corporate communications, someone who understood both the power of information and the importance of timing. I told Priya I was ready. She asked, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you at dinner Saturday. I need a witness." Saturday arrived. My mother had made her good dishes. The table looked the way it looked for every important family occasion: the good napkins, the candles, the particular care that she put into the physical environment when she wanted a gathering to feel significant. Marcus arrived with a confidence that cost him nothing, the way his confidence always cost him nothing. He hugged my mother, shook my father's hand, and gave me the specific look he had been giving me for 3 years, warm enough to look genuine, practiced enough to preclude real connection. The look of a man managing a relationship rather than having one. Priya was there as my invited guest, which Marcus noted with a polite greeting and no particular concern. Dinner was dinner. My mother's food. Conversation about things that didn't matter. Marcus held court the way he always did: stories, humor, that particular gift for making every room feel like it was assembled for his benefit. And then my father, reliable as always, brought it up. "Marcus," he said, in the careful way he had on the phone, "why don't you tell Jordan a little more about your situation? About what you need?" Marcus looked at my father and then at me with an expression that was calibrated between humility and confidence, the expression of a man who has decided that the right performance here is earnest and direct. "I'm in a tough spot," he said. "I don't love asking for help. You know I don't. But I need it right now, and family is family." He looked at me. "I know things between us have been complicated," he said. "I know the investment didn't work out the way I told you it would. I want to make that right. I'm going to make that right. But right now I need a bridge. Just something to get through this legal situation and stabilize, and then I'll pay back everything. Both debts. I promise." He said it so well. He really did. If I hadn't spent 3 years building the full picture. If I hadn't spent 2 years quietly rebuilding while he was relaxing. If I hadn't spent the last week making those 3 phone calls. If I had still been the person who sat across from him at my mother's birthday dinner, doing the math and saying nothing because I wasn't ready. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at Marcus for a moment across the table. And then I opened the folder I had brought and set it down in front of me. "I'd like to talk about the investment," I said. "Before we discuss anything else." Marcus looked at the folder. His expression didn't change much, just a slight tightening, the way a person tightens when they sense that the ground ahead may not be as solid as they thought. "Jordan," my father said. "This isn't really the moment." "I think it is," I said. Not loudly. Not with anger. Just clearly. "I think if we're going to talk about family and trust and financial help, we should be clear about what's actually happened in this family around those things." I looked at my mother. Her face was uncertain but open. "I gave Marcus $63,000 3 years ago," I said. "I want to walk everyone through what actually happened to that money." And I did. I walked through the entire document. Not reading it aloud, I knew it too well to need to read it. I explained, calmly and sequentially, what Marcus had told me and what the records showed. The business that never operated. The partner who left before it launched. The website that stopped being updated. The quarterly updates that grew vaguer as the money was spent. The Cancun trip. The watch. The rent and the lifestyle and the 3 years of my savings being used to maintain my brother's life while he told me, when he told me anything, that things were moving. My mother's expression changed somewhere around the 3rd minute. My father's changed later, he's slower to surrender a belief, around the 6th. Marcus sat very still. When I finished, the table was quiet. My father said, "Is this true?" Marcus said, "It's complicated." "Is it true, Marcus?" my mother said. Her voice was quiet in a way I had never heard from her. A very long silence. "It didn't work out," Marcus said. "I made decisions I'm not proud of. I intended to. The money is gone," I said. "All of it. And it was never in a business." I paused. "I want you to know that I've spoken with an attorney. The documentation I have is sufficient to pursue legal recovery. I haven't decided whether to do that. What I've decided is that I will not provide any additional financial support, not a bridge, not a loan, not any form of capital, until the $63,000 is fully repaid." My mother put her hand over her mouth. My father looked at Marcus with an expression I had never seen from him in 40 years of watching my father look at his son. Marcus looked at me. And something I had been waiting a very long time to see moved through his face. Not anger. Not denial. Something quieter and more total than either. Recognition. But that wasn't the end. Because I had made one more call that week. The one to Gerald Park. And what Gerald had told me about Marcus's reputation in the real estate community mattered in ways that were now becoming visible. The legal situation Marcus was facing, the investor who was threatening action, had been known, at the edges of that world, for several weeks. Gerald had heard about it through his own network. And when Gerald confirmed to me that Marcus was my brother, Gerald had done what connected people in professional communities sometimes do. He had quietly passed the word to a few relevant contacts that the situation had dimensions they should be aware of. I didn't ask Gerald to do this. I want to be clear about that. I mentioned the relationship and the history and what I had documented. Gerald drew his own conclusions about what that meant for his professional community's assessment of Marcus. By the time Marcus was sitting at my mother's dinner table hearing his sister walk through exactly what he had done, 3 separate contacts in the local real estate community had already declined to take his calls that week. One had told a mutual connection that something about Marcus's recent deal raised concerns. The dominoes were already tipping, quietly, professionally, without drama, in exactly the way that professional reputation damage moves. Not from a public accusation. From the accumulation of information reaching the right people at the right time. The investor pursuing legal action was not going to go away. Marcus's lawyer had told him as much. The money Marcus needed to stabilize the situation was significant. Without it, the legal exposure would formalize. And without professional relationships to build on, without the network of real estate contacts who would now look at his name with a slight hesitation, rebuilding after the legal situation would be substantially harder. Marcus had built his entire adult life on the foundation of being the person people trusted instinctively. The charming one. The one you wanted at your table and in your corner. He had never invested in being the person with a track record. He had invested in being the person who made you feel like a track record was unnecessary. And now the feeling wasn't working. After dinner, after my mother cried quietly in the kitchen and my father sat very still in his chair with the expression of a man reassessing decades of decisions, after Marcus made several attempts to explain and reframe and contextualize that none of us received the way he intended, Marcus and I ended up in the hallway alone for a moment. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen from him before. Not the managed warmth, not the performance of brotherly affection, not the confidence of a man who has always been the favorite. Something stripped of all of that. "When did you figure it out?" he said. 2 years after I gave you the money, I said. He absorbed that. "And you didn't say anything?" "No." "Why?" I thought about my answer for a moment. About the document I had built. About the savings I had rebuilt. About the calls I had made. About my father's voice and my mother's chessboard. I thought about my own chessboard in my mind, the one that had been laid out for 2 years while Marcus was living his life. "Because I wasn't ready," I said. "And because the moment matters as much as the truth." He looked at me for a long time. "What happens now?" he said. "That's up to you," I said. "You can make arrangements to repay what you took. Or I can pursue the legal route. Either way, there's no additional support coming from me until the first debt is addressed." "Jordan. I'm not angry with you, Marcus," I said. And this was true, which surprised me a little when I heard myself say it. I was. For a long time. But I'm not anymore. What I am is clear. About what happened and about what I need from here. He nodded. Slowly. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said. And I couldn't quite tell if it was an accusation or a compliment. "I know," I said. "That was your mistake. Let me tell you what happened in the months that followed, because the aftermath is part of the story and you deserve to hear all of it." The investor pursued the legal action. Marcus's exposure was formalized, a judgment that required settlement, the specifics of which I was not privy to but which I know from my mother involved a financial resolution that significantly depleted what Marcus had saved over the past several years. The real estate work he had been building dried up considerably. The network of contacts that had been his primary professional asset became less accessible, not because anyone made a public statement, but because information had moved the way information moves in professional communities, and the result was a version of Marcus's name that carried questions it hadn't carried before. He moved out of the apartment he had been renting for years, the one that was significantly above what his actual income could sustain, and into something smaller. My mother told me this with the specific kind of grief that mothers carry when the child they believed in meets the consequences of who they actually were. He reached out to me 4 months after the dinner. A text. Short, functional, without performance. It said, "I've talked to a financial advisor about a repayment structure. Can we have a conversation?" I read it and I thought about it for most of a day. Then I replied, "Yes. Set the meeting through an attorney so we have documentation." He did. We are currently 3 months into a repayment arrangement that, if maintained, will restore the full $63,000 within 4 years. Every payment is documented. My attorney reviews the structure quarterly. I don't know if Marcus has changed. I genuinely don't. Change is a long story and I am not far enough into it to know the ending. What I know is that the repayment is happening and the documentation is solid and I am not holding my breath while I wait. I have other things to do with my breath. My professional life in the period since the dinner has continued to develop in ways I could not have predicted when I was sitting in my apartment 3 years ago, fresh off a phone call where my brother told me the investment hadn't panned out. I was promoted again 8 months after the dinner, into a position that comes with the kind of responsibilities and compensation that represent, concretely and measurably, the distance between who I was when I made that transfer and who I became while Marcus was assuming I wasn't becoming anyone in particular. I have been asked twice in the past year to consult on projects at a level that positions me, professionally, in a different conversation than the one I was in 3 years ago. Gerald Park, the developer who had become part of the peripheral story of this situation, became a genuine professional contact, and then something close to a mentor, and has referred 2 significant consulting engagements to me in the past 18 months. I am telling you this not to perform success. I am telling you because the alternative story, the one where I confronted Marcus the day I understood what he had done, or the one where I collapsed under the weight of the betrayal, or the one where I waited but used the waiting only for anger, that story doesn't have this ending. The ending I have is the direct product of the choices I made about what to do with the time and the knowledge I had. Patience is not passive. I have said this before and I will say it again because it is the most important thing I know. Patience is the most active form of intelligence I am aware of. It requires more discipline than anger, more clarity than confrontation, more genuine belief in yourself than any public performance of confidence. When you are wronged and you choose patience, strategic, purposeful, documented patience, you are betting on your own capability. You are saying, I trust myself enough to wait until the moment is right. Marcus bet against that. He looked at me across a dozen family tables over 3 years and he saw someone who had been managed. Someone who had accepted an uncomfortable situation and moved on. He saw the version of me he needed me to be. He didn't see what I was building. My mother and I talk about it sometimes. Not often, she carries guilt about the part of this that involved her own preferences and blind spots, and I have told her what I believe, that she is not responsible for what Marcus did, but that the environment in which she treated his choices as more valuable than mine did create conditions he learned to exploit. She has heard that and she has sat with it, and I have watched her, in the time since, make changes in how she relates to both of us that feel genuine and earned. She asked me once, a few months after the dinner, whether I had planned everything from the beginning. From the moment of the phone call when Marcus told me the business hadn't worked out. Not everything, I said. I knew I was going to wait. I knew I was going to document. I knew I was going to rebuild first and act second. The specifics emerged over time. Were you ever afraid it wouldn't work? She said. I thought about that honestly. I was afraid plenty of times, I said. I was afraid I was wrong about what I'd found. I was afraid he'd somehow get ahead of it. I was afraid I'd wait too long and the moment would pass. What kept you going? She said. I thought about the savings account. The document. The chessboard that had lived in my father's study, the one I had played at since I was 10 years old with a man who had taught me to see 10 moves ahead, to build quietly, to let the board reveal itself before you moved. Dad, I said. She got a little tearful at that, the way she does when we talk about him. And then she squeezed my hand and said, he would have been so proud of you. I know, I said. And then I said what I hadn't planned to say but which came out with the certainty of something I had always known. He was proud of me before any of this. That was always the difference. Here's what I want to leave you with, because I've been thinking about what the real lesson is, not the surface lesson about documenting loans or not giving money to family or watching for red flags. Those lessons are real but they're not the deepest ones. The deepest lesson is about what you do with the space between being wronged and being made whole. Most people fill that space with anger. With confrontation. With the urgent need to be seen and believed and vindicated immediately. And I understand that impulse completely, I felt it. The night I did the math at my mother's birthday dinner and understood what Marcus had done, I felt every version of it. The rage, the humiliation, the almost physical need to walk across the room and say his name in a way that cut through all the performance. But anger is loud and loud is predictable and predictable is manageable. What is not predictable is the person who goes quiet. What is not manageable is the person who uses the wound as a reason to become something formidable. What is not beatable, truly not beatable, is the person who decides, in the silence after they have been wronged, to spend that silence building the most powerful version of themselves that has ever existed. Marcus underestimated me because he needed to. Because the alternative, accounting for what I was actually capable of, would have made his choices impossible. You can only steal from someone comfortably if you have decided they are not a threat. He decided I wasn't a threat. He was wrong. And here is the thing about being underestimated, about being the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who isn't caught because no one is watching. When you are ready, you hold every advantage. You know the terrain. You know the people. You know the full shape of what was done. And the person who did it has no idea you're coming, because they made the foundational error of deciding you weren't the kind of person who does anything. My brother looked at me for 30 years and saw the second child. The quiet one. The one who built carefully and spent wisely and didn't fill rooms. He didn't see the chess player. He didn't see the person who had been taught by the best. He didn't see that the whole time he was celebrating, I was counting moves. And when I had counted enough, when the board was set exactly the way I needed it, I moved. Not loudly. Precisely. The people who mistake your patience for weakness will always be surprised by your power. Every single time. Let them be surprised. Count your moves. And when the moment comes, and it will come, move.